Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiator, and welcome to my floor again. I've done a fair number of videos on this floor over the years, but I just had some swords turn up. So I thought, you know what? I think I know some people who like swords, and yeah, hopefully some of you like swords. These are all antique swords in here, so I thought I'd do a relatively brief unboxing. I can't remember everything that's in here actually, because I've been buying a few things recently. Mixture of things for me and things for stock for my website, Eastern Antique Arms, linked below here, if you're interested in buying antique swords. So what are we going to be opening the boxes with? I've got a CRKT here. It's the Viele, I think I'm not sure how it's pronounced. And it's a good little lock knife. I use it for a lot of my packaging, or opening packaging and packing things to send off. So very, very useful little knife, which I use a lot as a tool. Bought for me by my friend James Marwood many years ago, probably about, I don't know, like 12 years ago or something. It's given me good service. And I sharpen it. I just had to sharpen it. That's the only reason I'm mentioning this. With the DC4 ceramic sharpening stone, which I sharpen basically everything with, from swords to pocket knives to kitchen knives to everything, basically. Okay, so DC4 stone is kind of what I swear by. I'll stick a link below here to that product as well. So there we go. Let's have a little bit of opening boxes now, and let's see what's inside these things. That was quite a mission to get that one out. I do know what this is. So this is something that's come from a fellow collector. It's a very unusual thing actually, but before I start talking about it, let's actually get it out. For anybody who's thinking about receiving and sending swords, I do recommend that you keep bubble wrap, even offcuts of bubble wrap like this. It's super useful for packing. Right, this is a very interesting sword. I'm not entirely sure that I'm going to be able to get all of that bubble wrap off the scabbard, but I will show you the sword first off. So, first observations, there's a little bit of looseness in the wire wrap. That happens. So with all of these swords, let's just get you focused on the sword there. With all of these swords of this period, British swords anyway, you have wire in the recesses of the grip. It has a couple of purposes, that wire. I've been thinking about this. Why did British sword makers love having that wire there? Well, I think it serves two purposes. Number one, three purposes actually. Number one, it looks good. Number two, it actually helps keep the shagreen or shark skin on the wood of the grip if there's any kind of dampness or damage or anything else, and potentially assists grip as well. So we're on to four things already. But the third thing I've noticed from practice swords is that if you just have a wooden grip, often if you get a split, the split spreads very, very quickly, and your weapon becomes unusable. If you have a leather wrap around the grip, or cord and then leather, it holds the wood together. So even if the wood splits, you still have a functional weapon. And in fact, I've got swords which I know that the wood is split inside the grip, and I've used them for months and years in some cases. If you've got something around the grip holding it together, then it's still a functional weapon. Right, so this sword is super interesting, and it's been nicely service sharpened as well. Very nice sword. So what is it? Well, it's a Wilkinson light, first sight, it's a Wilkinson light cavalry officer's sword. Okay, it's numbered to the 1870s if I remember correctly. And it's in very nice condition. You can see the blade is very, very, very bright. It has a plated guard, so the entire hilt in fact, so therefore the steel of the guard and the back strap has been plated, nickel plated, which has prevented it from oxidizing, so you can see that it's quite bright colour still. But the thing that's really unusual about this sword is that it has an unusual coat of arms on the blade. Okay, now I don't know if this will manage to focus, but oh, looks like it might. There we go. So that coat of arms there. Now when I first saw that, I did a little bit of research and I quickly found out it's a Polish coat of arms. Okay. Then additionally, on the pommel here, instead of the normal sort of end to the nut you've got holding everything together, is a crest. So that is a stamp, a seal essentially, that you could stamp into wax and leave your seal on. And that exactly matches the coat of arms on the blade. Polish. Okay, so it's an English sword, but with a Polish coat of arms on it. No sign of any British royal cipher or anything like that. So my first thought was that this was bought by a Polish officer from Wilkinson. Wilkinson were internationally famous. We know that there were swords in the American Civil War that were purchased from Wilkinson by American officers because they knew Wilkinson's reputation. In fact, Robert Gould Shaw, the character from the film Glory, played by Matthew Broderick, his sword survives and it's a Wilkinson. Equally, we know that some Russian officers used Wilkinson swords in the Crimean War. So really, actually, to find a Polish officer purchasing a Wilkinson would not be so surprising. However, I applied, because Wilkinsons have a serial number on the back of the blade there, I sent off for the record to Richard Milner, and he sent the record back, and lo and behold, it does very clearly have a Polish name as the person that the sword was for, but there's some other text on there. And I'm not going to go any further into this at the moment, other than to say that very clearly it is for a Polish person, but I'm not yet clear whether it was a Polish person serving in the Polish military or whether it was a Polish person serving in some branch of the British military. And it also seems like the sword was purchased for them by someone else, quite possibly purchased by a British person from Wilkinson and given to this Polish person. So anyway, there we go. Lovely, lovely sword. Very, very nice sword. Lovely in the hand. It's 34.5-inch blade by 1 1/8 inch wide, which at the time Wilkinson knew as their medium cavalry. So it wasn't the largest size, it was one step down from that. And it makes it a very handy sword on foot or on horseback, and is a good kind of compromise size. Really lovely sword. This may feature in future videos. Right, let's move on to the next one. It's the polystyrene popcorn stuff. So I know a number of you commented on a previous video saying that some of this is edible and water soluble. I tried some of the stuff I had and that it was neither. So it's horrible stuff, I hate it. I can understand why some firms use it, but packing peanuts, that's what it's called, isn't it? But I am not a fan of it at all. Oh, so we've actually got 2 swords in here. 1, 2, and a whole load of packing peanuts. Right, let's get about cutting open some of these swords. Again, I'll just reiterate, I can't actually remember what's in these packets specifically. Incidentally, I just gave my knife a little bit of a sharpen up on my DC4 stone. It's excellent stuff, so it's cutting super well now. Yeah, for anyone who wants to post swords, these boxes are intended for golf clubs. So I'd highly recommend golf club boxes if you want to post swords around the world. The only thing I would say is they're single walled and they're not the toughest boxes in the world. Obviously double walled would be better, but I have trouble getting double walled boxes in that size and shape. Right. Sure, this is really fascinating for you all. Right, so what have we got here then? A very nice sword. Again, oh, am I going to be able to get that? Sometimes yes. Brute force and ignorance. There we go. No, I'm not going to be able to get the end bits of that off. It's always really difficult to get the bubble wrap off the scabbards, so it takes me a bit of time to do it off camera. Right, so the sword. So at first sight it appears to be sort of 1850s, 1860s probably. Could be later. But just the shape of the grip, the cant of the handle, you'll notice that we've got the line of the blade coming here, and then there's the handle cants up sort of forwards, as it were, and that is typical of slightly earlier date swords. When you get a little bit later, this Wilkinson's a good example actually, you'll notice the grip gets more in line with the blade. So it's not universal. You do find later swords like this, and you do find earlier swords like this occasionally, but the general tendency, if we put those swords next to each other, you can hopefully see the general tendency is for the earlier British swords to be more canted forward with the grip towards the cutting edge, and for the later ones to be more in line, probably for, they would think, for better use of the point, or they could have some other reasoning, I don't know. I've never seen it actually explicitly talked about in period sources. So this is very nice, and it has been well service sharpened. So in very nice condition, as you can see, this is another, I'll just kind of get the reflection on the blade for you. This is another bright, good condition sword with a lot of original polish. VR crown on there, Victoria Regina, and on this side Royal Artillery. It's a Royal Artillery officer's sword. Similar length blade to the other one, I think 34.5 inches, I'd say. The maker is unknown, okay? There's no maker's name on here, but there's an outfitter or retailer's name, and that is Millen and Mann of 135 George Street, Edinburgh. So almost certainly a Scottish officer bought this in the mid-Victorian period. Possibly this is made by Reeves from the proof disc, but we can't be certain of that. So just a very nice sword, and it has definitely, yes, it's definitely been service sharpened to down to there on the blade for reference. So basically halfway down the blade it's been service sharpened. So the whole cutting portion of the blade and obviously the thrusting point is sharpened. So that could have been taken to the Crimea or one of the other major campaigns of the mid-Victorian period. Very, very nice sword. Right, let's move on to, oh, there's one detail I mentioned. This is very unusual. In fact, I'll see if I can show you one here. So I just noticed this. Can you see that pommel is checkered, slightly checkered? Now normally that's a feature we find on cavalry swords, not on artillery swords. Usually artillery swords have a stepped pommel here and a little button, a tang button, a nut essentially. And usually a checkered pommel designates cavalry officer. So anybody who says that that is an absolute hard and fast rule, here we've got proof that's not the case, because the blade is very clearly marked to the Royal Artillery and the pommel is checkered. There we go. I can't remember ever seeing that before. So every sword can have something really interesting new to learn from it. Right, let's move on to the next sword. So here we go on to the next one, and I've cleared up the packing peanuts because I hate them with fiery passion. If you ever want to annoy me, turn up at one of my events with packing peanuts. No, don't do that. That'd be weird. Yeah, once again, I can't remember what's inside this. Ooh, looks like a... So little clues, Matt Easton clues. I can see a fully checkered backstrap, okay? What does that mean? So you'll notice these two swords are earlier and they are checkered here for the thumb, okay, for the thumb up saber grip when delivering point or when cutting. Some treatises have you stick the thumb up all the time, cutting and thrusting. Some treatises just have you stick the thumb up for thrusting. But in 1895, officially, in 1895, the entire backstrap became checkered like that, okay? So when the whole backstrap becomes checkered, technically should give you a slightly better grip. Wasn't the only change that happened in 1895. In 1895, the backstrap, as well as becoming fully checkered, also became straight, and this was also thought to assist with giving point or thrusting someone. So this should be a post 1895 sword, and it is in fact an 1895 pattern sword. So there we go. In 1895, there were two changes that came in. Let's pull that off. There were two changes that came into the new dress regulations, as they're called. I'm not going to be able to get this off the scabbard. It's stuck in there, but I can get the sword out. Right. So this is very interesting, actually. It gives us a few things to talk about. So there we go. This is the 1895 style guard. Okay, 1895 style guard, replacing the previous brass guard. And you can see that it's a sheet steel guard with perforations. The perforations aren't just there for decoration, they're there to reduce the weight of the hilt. So it means you can have a very protective guard that covers a lot of area without having it be very heavy. One of the problems with making a basket hilt or an all-enclosed hilt is weight. And the more that you make, the more stuff you put on the hilt of your sword, the heavier the back end of your sword gets, which not only makes the total weight of the sword heavier, but it makes it less effective at cutting, generally speaking, because it brings the point of balance back and the centre of percussion back. It just doesn't have great effects on the cutting capacity of a sword. So there we go. So that's the new 1895 model hilt with the new straight, fully checkered 1895 backstrap with an 1895 guard. But it is on an earlier blade. The blade is a Wilkinson, I think. Yep, Wilkinson numbered to the 1880s from the serial number. And it's got the officer's initials on, which I can go and research and match it up to a person. It has been service sharpened. In fact, wow, that's still quite sharp. So it's seen service somewhere. And this officer would have been in the army, probably joined the army in the 1880s, because that's when the blade dates from. And in 1895, they were they were coerced into updating their hilts to the new design. And that is Victoria on there. But we know that this hilt dates to 1895 to 1896, because in 1897, they brought out the 1897 hilt, which I'm sure annoyed lots of officers, and meant that some of them changed their hilts, but most of them didn't bother. They just kept the earlier 1895. The only difference is the 1897 has a turned up inner lip, and the holes are a little bit smaller in general. So a change to the guard, not really a change to the grip and backstrap. So this hilt dates to 1895, 1896. So whoever this person was, and I don't know who it is yet because I haven't researched it, this person was in the army in the 1880s and was still in the army in 1895, 96 when they replaced this hilt. So yeah, it'll be interesting finding out who they were and why their sword was service sharpened. So they must have seen action somewhere. It could have been in the 1880s, or it could have been in the 1890s. So it could have been before this hilt was fitted on here, or it could have been after. It could have been the Boer War. We don't know yet. So there we go. Nice example of a Wilkinson sword that had some degree of long service, was carried on active service, and was re-hilted. Let's move on to the next sword. So here we have the final sword. I've actually unwrapped it before filming this bit, simply because my memory card got full, so I thought let's just unwrap it. Right, so I knew what this was before I opened it by process of elimination, because I remembered buying this sword, and by opening the others I knew that this must be the last one. So at first sight it appears like a rifles officer's sword. I'm going to mention one thing before I go on. This dangling off here is the original 150-year-old approximately sword knot. That's a field service sword knot made of sort of woven leather, and it is really in relic condition. So what I will probably do, just in case you're wondering, is I usually do this with my swords. If there's a sword knot still on it, an original sword knot, I carefully remove it and I store it separately, because frankly this is only going to degrade further unless it's stored like in a plastic bag safely away. And if the sword was handled anymore with the sword knot in this condition, the sword knot would just fall apart. Another reason why I want to remove it is because it means that I can then clean the sword and pack the sword, post the sword, all that kind of stuff. I can do the things that I need to do with the sword without running the risk of damaging that sword knot anymore. But let's talk a little bit about the sword. So at first sight it appears, if we just look at the hilt for a second, just to get the camera to focus on there. So that is the strung bugle symbol of the Rifles. And rifle swords are very nice, but they're not uncommon. Okay, so at first sight this appears like a typical Rifles officer's sword. But it's not, for one main reason, although there's a minor reason as well. The grip is quite an interesting shape. This is the minor reason. It's quite a big, kind of thick grip, okay? It's thicker than normal, and it's kind of, I would say, made for a person with a big hand. Now that may be making an assumption, but it's a fairly big grip. Most of the grips are, if I just compare it to the artillery one, are a little bit kind of narrower. This is quite a thick one, okay? It's checkered on the back here. The sword probably dates to about 1885, thereabouts, or the 1880s, I would say, in general. But there's one thing which marks this out as different from a normal rifles officer's sword, above all else. And that is not only the fact that the blade is in absolutely lovely condition. Hopefully you can see there the original mirror polish and all of the frost etching on the blade. Okay, but that's, apart from the condition, which is very, very nice on this sword, it's the length of the blade that stands it out as different. The normal length of a rifle officer's sword is 32.5 inches. You can do the metric conversion if you need to. 32.5 inches, sometimes 33 inches. This is 35.5 inches, well 35.25 inches. So it's basically almost 3 inches longer than the standard length. So this was clearly special order. Companies didn't normally make certainly infantry officers' swords of that length. So it's a special order, presumably for someone who either was really tall or just wanted a really long blade. And now this is made by, or rather retailed by, Hawks of Piccadilly. Okay, so we see the maker's name down there. Now Hawks were a retailer, as it says here, to the Queen. They were top level maker. They later merged with Geeves and became Geeves and Hawks, and in fact Prince Charles's naval sword is from Geeves and Hawks, I think. And so essentially Geeves and Hawks were the kind of royal suppliers of uniforms and military gear. But earlier on Hawks were a separate company, and Hawks were a retailer, so they didn't make the blades. There were actually in Britain only a relatively small number of blade makers, including Wilkinson, Mole, Pillin, Thurkel, Reeves and a few others, okay? And they made blades for retailers as well as for selling themselves. So when we see a Wilkinson sword marked to Wilkinson, that means Wilkinson sold the sword themselves, probably, usually. Whereas in this case, this, if we look at the proof disc on the other side, I happen to know that that proof disc marks out this sword as a Wilkinson made blade. So Wilkinson essentially made this blade for Hawks to then retail, probably sometime in the 1880s. So there we go, as a special order, 35.25 inch blade in superb, lovely condition. It's not been service sharpened, so it probably never saw active service, but that is a kind of field service sword knot. It's not the full dress knot. In fact, for rifles, it should be black, and this one's brown, so I don't know what that's about. Anyway, I hope this has been somewhat interesting. 4 very, very nice swords there, at least a couple of which will be going for sale on my website in due course, but they're all lovely, lovely pieces. 3 out of the 4 service sharpened, so 3 of these 4 were probably taken on campaign. Very nice pieces. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and I'll see you for my next video. Bye folks! Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. We have extra videos on Patreon, and you can follow us on Facebook.